This is football. I am Kevin Clark. Football is designed to break your heart. And I call what we just saw, Bills, Ravens, I call them shower games. The reason I call them shower games, I've had many of them. Oh, maybe like less than 10, but enough. Enough to know the feeling. Ravens fans are going to think about that game in the shower for the rest of their lives. And they're going to do a little, geez. Or worse. This is a family podcast. I don't want to say it, but you're going to think about it. You're going to think about it when your head, when someone says don't think about anything, for the rest of their lives, they're going to think about that game. It's going to pop in. They're going to think about all the little things, not just Mark Andrews dropping the 2-point conversion when he hadn't had a drop since week 6 of this year, had 4 drops on, I believe, 69 targets this year. Came at the worst time. Not just the Mark Andrews fumble that he hadn't fumbled since 2019. What were you doing in 2019? Tell you what Mark Andrews was doing. Fumbling for the last time until tonight. The weird fumble from Lamar, they're going to think about that. They're going to think about the 2-point conversion before that was weirdly batted down when there was an open guy. They're going to think about all of those things. And every little play they see on the football field is going to remind them of that game. It's a shower game. You're going to think about it in the shower for as long as you live. Even if the Ravens one day reach the mountaintop, you're going to say, we could have had 2, we could have had 3, whatever it is, one more than what Lamar gets. And Lamar's going to think about it. It was funny because I just watched John Harbaugh's press conference, and he said that Lamar's message to the team was get back to work. And that's actually the best course of action. No pivots, no overreactions. Don't overreact in the offseason to one moment. What are you going to do? Go get a tight end who's not going to drop it? You had one. His name was Mark Andrews, and he dropped it in the biggest moment. Louis Riddick was on the show last week, talked about Myles Garrett saying the only people who can beat Baltimore are Baltimore. Congratulations for knowing ball, Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett, I guess, told Louis Riddick that they tend to do stuff they don't normally do in the playoffs versus the regular season. That happened today. I don't know what that is. For the 900th time, I'll quote Bill Walsh. There is no such thing as rising to the occasion. There is only executing normally when everybody else loses their heads. I'm not even sure if the Bills executed normally today, but they executed more normally than the Baltimore Ravens. And the Ravens, I think the frustration, we saw it with the last drive and then the drive 2 times before the fumble. The frustration is that the Ravens started clicking and the Bills couldn't stop them. That fumble killed them. That fumble, I think more so the Mark Andrews fumble, more so than the drop, was the deciding factor in this game. I didn't like, by the way, the Bills not going for it on 4th down. I think you just end the game. It's what I talked about on Saturday night. Culture. Trust your guys. Go out there and do it. You can get the 2.5 yards. I guess Sean McDermott said after the game that he thought it was a long, the scoreboard said 3. Maybe he was thinking it was a long thing and they stopped him. Lamar, by the way, Josh wanted to pitch that ball. He wanted to pitch that ball on 3rd down. He didn't do it. I'm glad he didn't. He was also kind of wrapped up. People were like, "Oh yeah, he passed up on that." And he was also wrapped up by a defensive lineman. So what's the takeaway from that? Can you criticize Lamar for that game? You can't criticize him for the drop. You can criticize him in general for not having playoff success because that's the job. It's unfair. I hate it. I hate looking at quarterback matchups like heavyweight boxing and saying, oh, it's Josh versus Lamar, because there's a million little pieces of nuance that we need to throw in the context there. I already mentioned Mark Andrews. If Mark Andrews is not on the roster, do they win this game? Probably. If they just have a league average tight end, which Mark Andrews is trending towards. Yeah, probably. But the point is, they always seem to play a little stilted in January. And I don't know what that is. And also, as I said earlier, there's no remedy for that. You just try again. Josh Allen said that he had a talk with Von Miller in the offseason. And that the one thing they talked about, and it entered his brain tonight, was that sometimes the ball just bounces your way. Sometimes it bounces your way. And if you're the Bills and you've gone through 13 seconds and you've gone through Tyler Bass missing that kick, you've gone through all those little things, you start to appreciate luck. Doesn't mean you can harness luck. Doesn't mean you can say, oh, in this situation, we're going to do blank. The Ravens, the sad thing to me is the Ravens don't have an obvious fix here. They don't. They were rolling in the second half, and they made two massive mistakes. They cannot go out and say, we're going to get a better kicker. Well, no, that wasn't the issue today. They can't go out and say, we're going to overhaul our secondary. I think the guidepost for modern team building where you do have a solution would be Bucks, Chiefs during COVID in Tampa. Biggest discrepancy in pressures in the history of the sport, I believe. Okay. Mahomes got pressured like 30 times. Brady didn't get pressured at all. Okay. And Brett Veach finds Mahomes like near an elevator bank and says, we're going to fix the offensive line. They do it. You've seen what's happened since. We're going to fix it. We're going to spend money. We're going to spend draft capital. We're fixing this offensive line. Remember, the reason it was so bad was because of injuries. But they went out and they addressed it and they fixed a unit in 1 year. The problem is I'm looking at this Ravens team and I'm saying, what's the fix? What does DeCosta do? You know what DeCosta does? He tries to get a little bit better and then hope. I know hope is not a strategy, but in this situation, don't fumble, don't drop the pass. I know it's the same guy. Bring him back. Because again, I already told you, he doesn't typically drop passes and he doesn't typically fumble. Don't overreact to that kind of thing. If you're in the arena, you're going to have losses like this. And it's unfortunate that Lamar might win another MVP and people are just going to say, like, I think last summer there was people on some shows being like, he's Joel Embiid. No, first of all, that is not the case. I don't even know where to start with that. But he's a great player who hasn't broken through. Peyton Manning was a great player who hadn't broken through. There's a lot of these guys. Guys are considered, they can't win the big one until they can, and then nobody brings it up anymore. That's what I said last night about, like, everybody made fun of Texas's kind of false dawns for years. And it's like, well, they're back and nobody brings it up anymore, right? All of these, you see it in coaches all the time. Oh, they can't win the big one. Then they did. Andy Reid couldn't win the big one. Then he just started winning every single Super Bowl. Part of that was Mahomes, but part of that was because he had a couple of problems that a superstar player could solve. I don't want to get into like who could solve this problem or what, but I wouldn't fire the coach. I wouldn't fire the OC or the DC, certainly. They got there. They just got unlucky. As Josh Allen said, sometimes the ball doesn't roll your way. What's the take from this? Unfortunately, it's funny. I had Lamar on my show after the Titans lost to the first one of these, the first devastating loss years ago. It didn't bother him that every time he'd post something, that every comment would be, Titans own you. You know how that goes. Look at a player's Instagram. It's like the comments. It's a cesspool. It's the worst place in the world. But how can it not bother you? Like sometimes I'll get a DM from my DMs are open, which is a massive mistake. But I'll just get a bit like some guy it's like, hey, you said this 5 years ago, and I go, I did? What? But and then you're like, for like 5 minutes, like that sucked. Anyway, these guys can't help but be affected by this in some way. And so I think the message is, as Harbaugh said, Lamar told the locker room, get back to work, don't overreact, don't panic. And they'll be bothered by it, but I wouldn't even let it fuel them. If you need that, if you need to say, hey, I'm going to have 15 more sprints this workout because I just saw an Instagram comment that pissed me off, fine. If that's your way of motivating yourself, that's fine. But I just think you run it back. You run it back and you hope that, I compare it, and I'm going to lose some of you guys in this one, but I compare it to the AFC with the quarterbacks, and I've said this for 4 years. It's like modern golf in the majors, where there are so many great golfers who in theory should win every single week. And when they're at their peak, Rory, Jon Rahm, Bryson DeChambeau, Colin Morikawa, let's go deep, Hideki Matsuyama, they ball strike to the point that if they just do a couple little things, they're going to win. And the tiebreaker is these little small margins. And that's what the AFC playoffs have become. Like CJ Stroud could have won that game yesterday if a handful of things had gone right. If a little tiny, even fewer handful of things had gone the right way today, Lamar's legacy is completely changed, but it's not. That's the way it goes. Run it back. Don't panic. And I don't think, again, we go back to this. The Ravens don't let the media narrative seep in and change the way they view their franchise. Never happened. It has never happened and it won't happen. So if tomorrow you're saying, well, they got to fire Harbaugh. First of all, who are you going to hire? That would be better. Second of all, was Harbaugh the problem today? I don't think Harbaugh was the problem today. So what was that? What are you trying to solve if you want to fire John Harbaugh? Just tell me that. Are you just saying, are you trying to do the NBA thing? Let's just shake it up. Let's just see how it goes. That's the NBA thing. Oh, these guys haven't gotten out of the second round. Haven't gotten the Super Bowl in 5 years. All right, well, let's just switch it up. Let's hire Rick Edelman. So that's kind of where I leave it on that one. Is it's heartbreaking. It's so sad. But I don't think there's anything you can do but stew. That's the depressing thing. Again, it'd be so much easier if you could just say, we'll replace this guy. No. The only thing you can do is do this exact same thing again, do it over again. It's like, what was that Tom Cruise movie, Edge of Tomorrow? You know what he is? It's Groundhog Day. It's Groundhog Day and Edge of Tomorrow. Both very good movies in their own right. But you just keep doing the same battle over and over and over again. I'm back to the Tom Cruise movie. Obviously, there were no war scenes in Groundhog Day. Maybe on the DVD. But you just go and you just keep going, and one day things break right for you. And I don't have a prescription better than that. They were unstoppable in the second half when they didn't turn the ball over and didn't drop passes. I don't know what else to tell you from there. Now, can you say, okay, so Buffalo led the league in turnover margin with 24. That was by a wide margin. I don't necessarily know if that's why they were fumbling today. I don't necessarily think. I mean, Terrell Bernard had obviously the great punch out there. That was great, but I just also think that it was just the Ravens playing a little weird. Football is designed to break your heart. I'm sorry. You're gonna think about it in the shower for the rest of your life, guys. It's also bad. I mean, who am I even talking to? I know one thing. Ravens fans are not listening to this podcast. This is the type of podcast that Ravens fans are going to see and say, I'm not listening to that. Again, I know because I have two teams that I adore. And when they lose a game like this, TV's not going on, going straight to Netflix. We're watching an episode of Seinfeld. I don't even want to see a hint of football for weeks. For weeks. I'm going to tell a story I've told before. The Philadelphia Eagles. And I was there in whatever summer they won after the Super Bowl. So it would have been 2018. And I was doing a story on the analytics stuff and like the fourth down decisions and all that stuff. And there was a guy there high up who said, listen, man, just shut up about this. And he was joking, but he was like, the reason we win football games is because we're always good in the lines. Always. And that all of those little things, the way they deal with contracts, the way they go for on the fourth down, all of these things help once you're in the tournament or start as a tiebreaker when you're playing the Patriots or whomever. But the reason the Eagles are consistently good is because they always know the lines are going to be right. Now, that's a philosophy borrowed from Andy Reid and Joe Banner and all those guys who established that a long time ago. They get the lines right and they pass efficiently. Those are the two things they're always going to do. And when I'm looking today and I saw Jalen Hurts 128 passing yards, Josh Allen 127 passing yards. And I'm looking here at the two Georgia kids. And it's Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter combined. 10 pressures, 5 hurries, 3 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles. Jalen Carter was just unguardable. And now he's playing every snap. 68 of 70 snaps, double teamed on 26 of those snaps, had the sack, relentless. And what's funny to me is that I actually, speaking of open DMs, I actually was thinking of this today. The guy sent me a death threat. You get those more than you think, and then you kind of just move on. Because I said that the Eagles had a good draft that year because his whole thing was that teams were going to run on Nolan Smith. And it's like, hey, buddy, Hey, death threat guy. Nolan Smith's pretty good, huh? You don't have to kill me now. So the Georgia thing always made sense. It was a moment in time because talent is not concentrated like that in the college level, but it got extremely concentrated before NIL and the portal became a thing. And Georgia famously, I think on their 2 national championships, did not have a kid portal out, I think, year over year. I think that was, I think there was some crazy stat like that, or one of their stars, whatever it was. They had very, very good retention. So they recruited as well as anybody in the country. Kirby had extreme minimums with height, weight, speed. Famously, he kind of said, we're not all that interested in Will Anderson Jr. because they didn't think he was going to grow that much. Like, he had extreme measurables, standards. And you see how many NFL bodies they have on that roster now in the 2021, 2022 season. So I loved what Howie did with Georgia because it was an extreme concentration of really great, the fastest, biggest people on the planet in some cases who could move, uber athletes. And there was some stat that like 70% of 5-stars went to the same 5 schools over and over and over again, for like the 2010s basically. And just mining those schools, LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, mining those schools over and over and over again became a really, really good idea. And so the idea that Georgia built this Death Star, and Howie said there is literally no limit to how many guys I'll take from this, was always going to be good business. The stat that Jalen Hurts had 128 yards passing and they won today is a Howie Roseman stat because of what they were able to do. Quinyon Mitchell leaves the game. They're able to overcome it. Now, it's a huge problem next week with Jaden Daniels coming to town if Quinyon Mitchell can't play. It sounded like he has no long-term effects, but we'll see how that goes. Isaiah Rodgers replaced Quinyon Mitchell, and he allowed, according to Next Gen Stats, 5 receptions, 106 yards, 10 targets. Darius Slay was also targeted 16 times today, mostly because Quinyon Mitchell left the game. And the Rams could have won that game, by the way, very easily. And that, by the way, like kind of the same deal as the Ravens. You're not going to have the same emotional impact because you won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, because they overachieved. They're in a different life cycle, even though who knows what's going to happen with the quarterback situation. But I think that just, McVay after the game said, he just told his guys, like, I love you, and we're just going to keep going. Like, they're just going to keep improving the roster. There's no pivot, there's no anything, unless of course they change quarterbacks, and then again we'll see with that. But the Rams just have to keep building because they have a fast, athletic defense that was in the backfield all day long. They got to get better against against stopping the run, specifically against Saquon Barkley. Let's do trivia time. Let's do this. Josh Dubow from the AP put out this stat: most rushing yards versus one opponent in a season. Some of these are 3 times. So Lord knows what would have happened if Saquon Barkley played the Rams a 3rd time. Adrian Peterson, 508 yards versus the 2012 Packers. In fact, I believe all of them were divisional. Yes, except Saquon. So let's do it. Adrian Peterson, 508 yards against 2012 Packers. Jamal Lewis, 500 yards against 2003 Browns. I believe that was, you guys remember that year. O.J. Simpson, 469 yards against 1973 Pats. Derrick Henry, 462 yards versus the Texans in 2020. Saquon Barkley, 459 yards against the Rams in 2024 in just 2 games. Again, Howie Roseman, understanding value, understanding that in the same week you sign Landon Dickerson, that for a fraction of Landon Dickerson, you can have perhaps the top of the market at the running back position. The Ravens understood the same thing, almost got to the conference championship game tonight. The Rams did everything right. Jalen Hurts was under pressure 40% of his dropbacks today. But it didn't matter because there were a bunch of ways to beat you. Taking care of the football is like the theme. So I always say we overreact to last year's playoffs at every time. We go, oh, you got to have this, you got to have that. We got to have a big nose tackle. You got to have a quarterback who can do blank, blah, blah, blank. We always do it. And the answer is usually in the middle. Like, yeah, maybe trends are starting to. So Howie Roseman actually once told me they do a full audit of the last 4 teams remaining, height, weight, speed, college, all that stuff, to see if they're missing anything, right? We're not going to do wholesale changes because the Final Four indicates that there's more players from the West Coast on these teams, right? You might say, hey, let's look at that more. Hey, should we take a scout and put him more in Washington State than Minnesota, right? Like you might change that a little bit, but you're not going to do wholesale changes. And what's funny to me is the trend in these playoffs is ball security. This is from the NFL Network. The only team that has committed even one turnover and won a game this postseason was the Texans in the wild card round against the Chargers. And as you remember, the Chargers are doing some giveawaying of their own. And it was 3 giveaways, 4 takeaways in that game. So that's what you need to know about the Chargers and the Texans there. If the Bills did hold on to the ball, they were the 9th straight playoff game won by teams with 0 giveaways. So let me ask you a question. This is kind of like the Mark Andrews thing. What do you learn from that? Do you learn, we shouldn't draft guys who fumble? Okay, we already learned that lesson. We shouldn't draft or trade for quarterbacks who throw interceptions. We already learned that lesson. We shouldn't do, receivers who tip the ball. Already learned that lesson. It's just, this is about execution at the right time. And I don't think, and also a little bit about how maybe some of these games are closer and uglier than we thought, and that 1 or 2 or 3 giveaways ends up determining the game, which, by the way, I mean, the Ravens almost won this game even with those turnovers. But I think that there's a simplicity in playoff football. Like, just do everything right and good things will happen. And I think far too often we get so in the weeds on, oh man, they put 7 linemen on the field and they threw out of it. That was awesome. And there's so much of that. There's so much of that. But 99% of the time, these games come down to who does their job. Bill Belichick says it. When you say do your job, what's implied is do your job well. And what the Eagles were able to do today, high leverage downs, Saquon taking it to the house, not making mistakes, the lines being good, even though Jalen Hurts under pressure. Jalen Hurts doing enough, not turning the ball over, all this stuff. That's what playoff football is all about. I think that the Eagles are going to win next week. I think they're going to go to the Super Bowl. We'll have a preview of that on Monday. I think the Chiefs are going to win as well. We'll have a preview of that on Monday with a player who knows the Chiefs very well. Thank you to Miles. Thank you to Flynn. This has been football. We'll see you on Monday. Then we're going to have an episode on Tuesday. And then, of course, we'll do the instant reaction next weekend as well. We'll see you tomorrow night.